So you finally got your first 3D printer, but now you're stuck because you can print only things that other people make and you would like to start making even your own things. I'm gonna show you 5 of the most popular 3D printing softwares and hopefully pick the right one for you, because not all of them are for the same use. Because of course, 3D printing the models that are online might be super fun, but I think the main superpower of 3D printing is that you can make anything. But if you can design it, you can make it. Because all I wanted from 3D printing was the ideas that I had to turn into something real. So let's start from the easiest. One of the best 3D designing softwares is Tinkercad, because it is so intuitive and all it is basically a playground with simple shapes that you move around, you can join them, cut them together and then create more complex shapes. I started with Tinkercad and I think it's one of the best options to start with, because it allows you to get adjusted to the 3D space that then you will be practicing even in the more complex softwares. And that's where I think many people go wrong, because they jump into the very complex designing softwares and then they get confused because they aren't used to working in the 3D space. But if you start with Tinkercad and spend there just a few hours trying to see how everything works, you will teach your brain how to think in 3D. So for just starting out, I would highly recommend it. Later in the designing journey, Tinkercad would be inefficient. Now that brings me to Nomad, because Nomad is still really easy and it is very intuitive. It's basically like playing with a piece of clay. It's very beginner friendly, and if you want to make sculptures or miniatures like these, it's definitely a way to go. It isn't for free, but it's a purchase of about $15 and it allows you to then use it for all the time. I started Nomad only a few months ago because I'm more on the mechanical part of designing, but it's absolutely amazing for something that is more aesthetical than mechanical. Now Nomad brings me to a similar one, but a more complex and a more professional one, which is Blender. It might sound surprising that Blender was actually the first software that I started with, but I spent about a week trying to figure things out with YouTube tutorials, only to feel completely confused and then thinking that designing was just not for me, and I quit for 3 months. But now that I see it from a bit more experienced view, I know that Blender is absolutely amazing for a bit more organic shapes and even some mechanical designs, but it has a pretty steep learning curve. So if you think that more organic and aesthetical parts are something that you would definitely like to design, I would go for Blender. But don't get discouraged when it gets confusing, because you just need to push past that first initial steps. But once you learn it, it will be very rewarding, because you will be able to make any complex shapes that other softwares that are a bit more mechanical might not allow. And even more, Blender is completely free to use. And that brings me to my absolute favorite, which is Autodesk Fusion. Because Fusion has a free version too, and it has most of the features as the paid one, so if you're just starting out, I think it's absolutely amazing. And to know if Fusion is for you is if you want your models to be a bit more mechanical and parametrical. I think you can see the clear comparison of the average model in Blender and the average model in Fusion. For example, for me, I got into Fusion because I wanted to start making robots, which parametric designing is amazing for. And also, I have a free student license. If you are a student, definitely register for one. Also, I would say that Fusion is pretty easy to navigate in, and for example, to compare with other softwares, I never felt lost in Fusion. With other softwares, I would spend hours looking in the environment to create a single model, but Fusion usually combines all of these tools to create the feature for you. And for me, it took about 3 months to start feeling confident about using things in Fusion, which resulted in me doing so many unnecessary steps, only to then watch some tutorials and realize that it could be done a lot easier. So if you want, I have already posted a tutorial on how to design this container with a thread that is beginner friendly. So if you want, you can definitely check it out and start your Fusion journey. Now, if you want to go really heavy into parametric modeling, there are 2 softwares on the last place. One of them is Inventor and the second one is Solidworks. Now these are priced quite heavily, but it's definitely worth it if you are planning on long-term designing, because Inventor will cost you about $200 a month if you buy the annual yearly subscription, and Solidworks is able to be for $50 a year, but only the hobby plan, which is non-commercial. And to be able to decide between these 2 softwares, I would say that Inventor is a lot better for you if you have used Fusion before, and if you want to go into models that will have a lot more parts, because it has a better assembly management. But on the other hand, the user interference might feel a lot more confusing if you haven't used any of the Autodesk products before. That's what Solidworks has a bit better figured out, because even though it is quite a complex designing software, it feels a lot more intuitive without any prior knowledge. And Solidworks makes it really easy to edit the steps that you have done in your designing process from the history. So hopefully now you know a few of the basic designing softwares that you can use for 3D printing. Of course, there's so many more that I haven't included in the video, and that's why just for you I made this quiz that only asks you 5 questions and then tells you the best designing software for your start. So it includes a lot more of the designing softwares, and if you would like to check it out, it will be in the description. But if you want, you can share your experience in the comment section to help others figure out what designing software they should pick. Perhaps you have a completely different opinion on one of the softwares that I mentioned, and if you share that, I I would appreciate it even more in the comments so that even I can learn something new.